Hi, and welcome to today's program. I'm Kate Averett, the Outreach Manager of the Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center. Today, we'll be having a discussion with the lead designers and architects behind the Mariposa Land Port of Entry. Completed in 2014, the modernization of the Mariposa Land Port of Entry on the border of Arizona and Mexico has come to represent a new standard for architecture and design for United States border ports. Mariposa was designed and implemented by Jones Studio, the celebrated architectural, interior design, public art, and planning firm that was founded by Eddie Jones in 1979. Imagined as a garden oasis, Mariposa balances the functional needs of a border port with environmentalism and human dignity, prioritizing connection over division and celebrating the natural landscape shared by citizens of both the United States and of Mexico. This presentation will be led by Jones Studio founder Eddie Jones, Principal Brian C. Farling, and Senior Associate Maria Salenger, as well as landscape architect Chris Winters. The landscaping of Mariposa Land Port of Entry, which was so critical to its success, was designed by Chris Winters, Eric Barrett, and Todd Muma. Following the presentation, please join us for a brief discussion on the project's lasting impact for both the designers and those that utilize the Port of Entry on a daily basis. Now I'll hand things over to Jones Studio and Chris Winters.
I am a citizen of the world. What world? This world, of course. However, our presentation will only focus on the current impact of this 2,000-mile long imaginary line called the US-Mexico border. All of us have heard of China's Great Wall. It's a 2,600-year-old idea that didn't work. This is our country's wall. It's skinny, not great, and it doesn't work either. But that's not the point. Apparently, it is a powerful political tool. The little town of Nogales was once a unified community. The 1853 Gadsden Purchase placed a segment of the 2,000-mile-long imaginary line through its middle. Today, Nogales, Arizona shares a wall with Nogales, Sonora, but at least neighbors can talk and see one another through the slats and barbed wire. You may recognize this image from news reports 3 years ago. These are the prototype wall proposals commissioned by the last administration. None were selected. Each failed Customs and Border Protection's basic penetration tests. There are 35 land ports of entry along the southern border. Their purpose is to control material and people departing or entering the United States. One of the busiest land ports of entry is located in Nogales, and Jones Studio was hired to modernize this port called Mariposa. So we went to Mexico. The reality of life on the border is more complex and unjust than we realized. We associated with a nonprofit organization named Borderlinks. Their mission is to introduce people like us to a dynamic educational experience and allow the voice to be heard. Decades of insensitive border policy has produced dehumanizing conditions for both visitors and customs officers. We turned to Arizona poet laureate Alberto Rios, who was raised in Nogales, for some objective guidance. I will read you a very relevant poem he wrote in 2003. It's called Borderlines. A weight carried by two weighs only half as much. The world on a map looks like the drawing of a cow in a butcher's shop, all those lines showing where to cut. That drawing of the cow is also a jigsaw puzzle, showing just as much how very well all the strange parts fit together. Which way we look at the drawing makes all the difference. We seem to live in a world of maps, but in truth, we live in a world made not of paper and ink, but of people. Those lines are our lives. Together, let us turn the map until we see clearly the border is what joins us, not what separates us. Clearly, our challenge as architects was to find the balance between law enforcement and a welcoming gesture of respect for visiting neighbors. We aspired to create spaces that not only represented the dignity of the United States, but connected people to nature and offer some respite from the anxiety of inspection.
This respite, this garden, is an offering of welcome to America. The gesture as an experiential idea is born in the concept of an oasis. And the idea of a garden that embraces both the visitors moving through the port, but also the officers and staff that work at the port every day. It offers a breath of nature, of dignity, of humanity. There's also an element of education and water consciousness. This view of the oasis garden that Eddie has shown, and that Chris will share in more detail, a respite in the heart of the port, can also become a moment where the architecture celebrates and reminds of the preciousness of water in the desert by creating an experience of the work it is doing, collecting the rain into a 1 million gallon underground cistern, and embracing the sometimes violent storms as a joyous occasion, a moment of symbiosis with nature and the larger world. Another gesture of welcome to America is expressed through the delineation of a new threshold. This aerial view of the port before our reimagination has no clear wayfinding of front door, adding to a stressful experience of arrival. The design team turned to the American flag as a way to bridge the sometimes political nature of bold color and identity. How many colors do you see here? If the answer is 3, you're not looking closely enough. We see an endless collection of red, white, and blue hues, all set in motion by the wind waving the flag and the sun's rays activating the color. We saw an opportunity to abstract these colors and utilize them as both a welcoming threshold and a wayfinding device. At the far left, the red tells the visitors in cars to come this way. At the right, the blue lets the truckers move forward towards the cargo inspection, and at the whiter tones in the center, the pedestrian is greeted. This threshold can be seen from well beyond the border as it stretches from one side of the port to the other, a welcoming, artful embrace.
I'm going to be talking about the integrated art and artists that we worked with in making the port of entry aesthetic experience. 2 projects we'll share were commissioned by the GSA's Art and Architecture program, joining a collection of more than 75,000 pieces. And 2 others are projects initiated by the architectural design process itself. In preparing this presentation, we've included each of the artists' website addresses for any viewers of this talk who would like to delve further into their amazing work. The first piece encountered by people arriving from the US, or to the US from Mexico at the border threshold was made by one of the artists selected by GSA. Kim Suja is a multidisciplinary conceptual artist, South Korean born and based in New York. Her practice combines performance, film, and installations using textiles, light, and sound. The work raises questions about the conditions of humanity. In her videos and installations, she uses repetitive actions and meditative practices to create an aesthetic experience. In many pieces, everyday actions such as sewing become performative. Filmed in Nogales in 2013, an album, Sewing into Borderlines, consists of silent video portraits of community members who live with the daily reality of commuting between the US and Mexico. Placed literally at the pedestrian entrance on the border, the outdoor LED screen projects the panoramic video portraits. Each individual person in the portraits is shown in 3 different positions: facing the viewer, facing away, and turning back towards the viewer. The artist provoked the action of turning back towards the viewer by calling the name of each individual during the filming. She notes, these poses represent the individual's journeys through past, present, and future. The figures facing the camera suggest arrival and encounter, whereas those same figures facing away from the counter evoke departure and separation. Moving away from Kim Suja's piece, port visitors encounter concrete walls amid the landscape. Within the walls are detailed, life-size footsteps. These art elements were developed collaboratively within Jones Studio. The concrete walls were cast on site, each panel poured laying down, enabling us to imprint the patterns while curing. Then the panels are tilt up into place. A diversity of unique prints travel from one wall and building to another, tying the architecture to the movement of people moving forward and connecting. Stepping inside the visitor lobby, 2 pieces of poetry are inscribed in glass partitions within the queuing lanes. The first is Alberto Rios's Borderlines, as Eddie shared. The second is titled The Pledge, written by Joan Barron and part of Joan Studio's educational signage about the environmental sustainability of this architectural project. Arizona-based artist Joan Barron is a friend of Joan Studio. She works with ecology and cultures of place in her work. In 2009, paralleling our startup with the Mariposa project, she made this piece, a mixed media installation for various sites. It consists of ceramic hand-like shapes laid out in horizontal bands like the stripes in the American flag. The ground material consists of rich red dirt. The stars are represented by small, solid, round clay discs symbolic of the cosmos, the earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars. The ground is represented by recycled shell and sand. Accompanying the physical piece, Joan wrote the poem, The Pledge, to acknowledge the brilliant interconnectedness of the natural world. She offered us this poem to be part of the Port of Entry project. So we installed the poem among the queuing areas in the main visitor lobby. We found its correlation to the sustainable design aspects of the project and interwove her poem lines with our interpretive educational signage that I'll read segments of now. We pledge allegiance to the world. More than 80% of the Earth's land surface shows indications of human activity. Continued human expansion impacts wildlife and water supplies. Human life benefits from clean water, soil, air, and a healthy ecosystem to thrive. The Port of Entry rehabilitates its brownfield site. Hazardous material was abated, and the new port includes over 24 acres of open landscape space, which is equivalent to 9 times the building size. And all sentient beings within. Forests act as a filter, contributing to cleaning of water and air. Trees pull carbon from the atmosphere and provide oxygen, a key element of life on Earth. The Forest Stewardship Council works towards responsible management of the world's forests by respecting Indigenous people's rights, supporting the well-being of forest workers and local communities, and reducing the environmental impact of logging activities. More than 80% of the wood at Mariposa has been certified and assists in the maintenance of these ecological functions and integrity of the world's forests. And to this planet for which we share. Buildings are the most significant consumer of energy that produces greenhouse gases. In order to combat global climate change, we must first slow the growth rate of greenhouse gas emissions and ultimately reverse that trend. Development and implementation of innovative, sustainable design strategies in the buildings at Mariposa has provided a 35% reduction in energy usage and contributed to the procurement of green power to offset another 35% of its energy demand over a 2-year period. One vision, daylighting and views provide for the health and well-being of officers, employees, and visitors of Mariposa. The majority of occupied spaces are served with natural daylight through strategically located windows and skylights. A lighting control system responds to natural daylighting levels, conserving energy while offsetting the amount of artificial light required. The U.S. Department of Energy studies show there are no electric light sources that provide the positive influences on human sleep-wake cycles as natural daylight. Natural daylight's variation in light, color, and intensity throughout the day also assists in human performance on the job. Interconnected. 1/3 of the value of materials used to build Mariposa were extracted, processed, and manufactured within a 500-mile radius of the site. Purchasing regional goods for this project allowed more of its federal funds to stay in local communities, benefiting the local economy. Using materials from this local area also limits fuel consumption and the associated carbon emissions by reducing transportation distances throughout construction. With dignity, increasing global population means there are more people on the planet with potential to create waste. Improper handling of waste can be costly and lead to contamination of land, fresh water supplies, and our oceans. Methane is a greenhouse gas and a byproduct of landfills. Recycling helps to alleviate demand for landfills and reduces the pollution caused by waste. It also reduces the need for raw materials and saves the energy that would have been expended to process those materials. About 16% of the materials used to build Mariposa are recycled, and the project diverted 97% of its construction debris generated over 5 years from disposal in landfills and incinerators. Shelter. Exposure to carbon dioxide, construction adhesives, sealants, hazardous particulates, and chemical pollutants inside of buildings can bring on a variety of negative effects on human health. Mariposa used products, paints, and coatings with low volatile organic compounds, installed green label carpet, and flushed the air supply to the interior spaces prior to move-in to provide a healthy environment for its inhabitants. Outdoor air is monitored for carbon dioxide buildup to protect officers, employees, and visitors. Food and sustainable world community for all. Availability of potable water affects the health and productivity of communities on a global and local scale. Water is precious to all aspects of daily life, from food and energy production to personal health and hygiene. Respectful of the important water sources on which we all depend, Mariposa reduces standard potable water consumption by 38% through its plumbing fixtures, but most significantly, the rainwater collection system to the 1 million gallon storage tank, provides all the water required to support the landscaping. Passive local water harvesting and careful selection of indigenous plants further limit the need to use drinking water for landscape irrigation. As visitors officially enter the United States, departing Mariposa's main lobby, they follow a pathway sequence envisioned by artist Matthew Moore, also selected by GSA's Art and Architecture program. Matthew Moore is an artist and fourth generation Arizona farmer. His art explores the broad issue of placemaking, often by creating large scale installations with the goal of achieving a state of wonderment, contemplation, and invitation to change. Matt states, "It may seem a strange accompaniment, farming and art, but they share deeply rooted similarities. Both farming and art give us complex ways of understanding the world and our place in it. Often I find that farming is an endeavor of questioning and exploration, the same negotiations inherent in the practice of making art. For me, making art is creating, questioning observations of how we live and illuminating those choices to incite new discourse on what it is to be human." His past work includes large site-specific organic earthworks on and around his family's farmland, recently encroached by urban development from Phoenix. His art piece at Mariposa Passages references migration patterns of birds and other wildlife amid the nearby Bobocovari Mountains running north-south across the Mexico-US border. The sculpture is located above the primary pedestrian exit and pathway. The sculpture begins indoors and extends almost 100 feet in total length northward as visitors depart the port campus and make their way to the city of Nogales. The process of making the sculpture included an incredible study, articulating the topography in this inverted mountain range. The blue acrylic circles placed along the sculpture and undulating metal forms reference differing forms that connections and pathways can take.
My colleagues have shared the manifestation of our ideas and aspirations in art and architecture. The canvas upon which this art and architecture was painted is nature. The Mariposa land port of entry occurs in a lyrical landscape within the Sonoran Desert that has been inhabited for thousands of years by diverse cultures. It is beautiful, rugged, remote, and biologically diverse. It is also a region with a troubling past. Tom Sheridan, in his book, Landscapes of Fraud, describes the energy at the border as the pent-up frustrations and aspirations of Latin America slamming against the barriers of surveillance that contain them. The design team saw this unfortunate reality as an opportunity to explore the border as a point of connection rather than division. The point of departure for connection over division is moving beyond us and them and sincerely believing that we share this landscape with everyone who lives in it or passes through it. Where we respect and value this landscape, it is healthy and supports us. But when we disrespect, damage, and divide it, we cause harm to our social well-being, economic equity, and environmental equilibrium. The process of restoring the landscape at the port and creating meaningful gardens started with studying contextual built environments and how they were integrated into the landscape. The image above was an inspection booth at the former port. The lower image is the mission at Tumakakari. Both places in these images contributed to bisection and dispossession of landscape and culture in the border region. However, one of these places also provided moments of sanctuary and repose. We chose to learn from both the good and the bad in the surrounding environment. We learned from the simplest of vernacular gardens and looked to them for cues related to materiality, aesthetic, and tradition. Our goal was to create a fountain in the sand, an oasis in the desert at the port. The historian and librarian Lawrence Powell recalled that he traversed the Tohono O'odham Nation once in spring when the desert was a garden. And when he came upon the city of Tucson, it was in some ways like coming on a desert. The existing port was a series of congested spaces dominated by asphalt and concrete through which people and cars moved in conflict. Our goal was to transform the built environment through the integration of art and architecture with nature to create a processional landscape through which people could move with comfort and dignity. This process allowed us to metamorphosize, to change the form, nature, and character of this place, to replace hostility and banality with a humanizing experience that welcomes visitors to the port through a series of gardens set in a restored natural landscape. When one physically crosses the border, they now pass through a shady bosque of mesquite trees through native grasses, protected from traffic on both sides by sculptural walls of recycled concrete before they reach customs. Gardens are rhetorical landscapes. They are made of the same materials as the surrounding landscape, just as the rhetorician's words are those given by the language. But as Cicero defined the duties of the rhetorician, these common elements must be chosen to instruct and move and delight. We observed the vocabulary of natural and man-made materials that occur in the surrounding landscape: concrete, stone, steel, native plants, and precious water. And we chose and arranged those common elements to compose gardens for viewing from within, circulating through, and respite from work or travel. These gardens transcend aesthetics and affect behavior, performance, and health. They allow decompression, they help to clean the air and water around them, and they provide direct visual connection to nature. And calming background views from interior spaces. Elevating the built environment and connecting it to nature affects the attitudes and demeanor of those who work in these spaces or pass through them. These gardens and the landscape in which they occurred are scored. They have been arranged in a processional manner that reflects how each is used and relates to adjacent spaces. This approach balances the poetic with the pragmatic and ensures they are efficient and provide safety and security without compromising beauty. And the restoration of the natural landscape through capturing and cleaning stormwater and revegetating the site with native plants transformed the old port back into the desert garden Powell traversed in spring. Finally, I would like to stress the importance of our collective decision to create a garden as opposed to buildings in a landscape. Gardens have special meaning and play an important role in human history. Mark Francis addresses the role and importance of gardens eloquently in the introduction to his book, The Meaning of Gardens. Gardens have special meaning. They are powerful settings for human life, transcending time, place, and culture. Gardens are mirrors of ourselves, reflections of sensual and personal experience. By making gardens, using or admiring them, and dreaming of them, we create our own idealized order of nature and culture. Gardens connect us to our collective and primeval pasts. Since the beginning of human time, we have expressed ourselves through the gardens we have made. They live on as records of our private beliefs and public values, good or bad. I would like to think that the gardens that we, the people, citizens of the world, and emissaries of the United States have given to everyone who works and passes through this port of entry will live on as a record of our shared values and beliefs.
The land port called Mariposa proved there is a way to smooth the rough handshake between our two countries, and it provided Jones Studio with additional opportunities to make a difference. This is the existing condition of the Otay Mesa land port east of Tijuana. Our proposal, now under construction, shows the value of connection over separation and will give people a more respectful border crossing experience. The produce farms surrounding Yuma, Arizona provide jobs for thousands of migrant workers. Their daily environment inspired our solution for the new San Luis pedestrian processing building. The design honors their place and efficiently provides daily commutes back and forth so the workers can spend more time with their families in Mexico. This image was taken in 2008. Mariposa, one of our nation's busiest front doors, was unsafe and unhealthy for all who passed through. It is with genuine pride our team shows you this photo taken from the same angle 8 years later. It's simply a difference in attitude. Does the border separate or connect? Yet there is still a wall and still much work to do. Why should I care? Because I am a citizen of the world. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. I think this image of a border as a garden is one that has just been so inspiring. Just when considering this project and as we've considered the exhibition that we're kind of drawing this connection with, I'm a citizen of the world. And I was first introduced to this project by Chris Winters in this idea of building a garden. And my understanding of that was almost this project being a form of harm reduction in a way. I don't know if that's taking too much of a leap. But I think I have many questions to pose to y'all. I'm trying to not pose 20 of them all at the same time. So maybe one place to start is kind of where we left off. I'm thinking about this continuum of what you have accomplished with Mariposa, what you're continuing to accomplish, and how this could be a blueprint for the future in a lot of ways. So Eddie, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the Design Excellence Program and how that went into the planning of this project. And then if you have anything further to say about, the trajectory of where this is going. And I would love to hear from all of you really about how your approach to Mariposa has impacted the way that you've viewed these kinds of projects moving forward.
Well, I'm very grateful to be able to talk about that. There's plenty of reasons at any moment in time to be critical of one's government, right? But one area within the United States government that is always admirable is the Design Excellence Program that was created by the General Services Administration. That the GSA, as we call it, they own all the federal buildings and are responsible for maintaining them as well as designing new ones. And so land ports of entry for hopefully obvious reasons, fall within the responsibility of the Design Excellence Program, and the GSA mandates design excellence, as the name would imply, and that's useful when an architect is working with a user client such as the Customs and Border Protection. Their needs are centered around serious law enforcement. That yet the GSA and their architects are very much interested in representing the United States in a dignified and positive way. So those two things can be somewhat conflicted, but that's where the fun begins, to resolve that disparity in so-called agendas. And but we have the Design Excellence Program at our back. We're not just by ourselves advocating good design and thoughtful design and environmentally responsible design. We have that mechanism, that giant behemoth of the GSA backing us up. So it's been a great experience for us. Now, the good news is that when I say we made a difference, we did. Our team, Chris and his garden concept, and reimagining the circulation in the port and how people are going to be inherently on edge, because they're being subjected to inspection. Having the opportunity to rethink all of that and produce a different kind of port was a huge success. And we were told that the other ports of entry along the southern border would look to this Mariposa as the new model. And so each time we are commissioned to redesign or modernize a port, we have that strength, of precedent behind us. And it's been, we're not becoming complacent, by golly. We challenge ourselves each and every time, and we search for the possibilities that are unique to each of the border crossings. We're even working up on the northern border now, Canadian-US border, which it's as night and day in terms of one's contentious and the other one isn't. So, but it's a hell of a ride, let me tell you.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore Eddie's point. We come into all of our projects with exuberance and optimism. And who would have thought that the government would be one of the clients that embraced what we are as designers and architects more so than anyone else. I think we were genuinely optimistic about the Design Excellence Program, but rewarded beyond our imagination, I would say.
That's really fascinating to hear, because I think that's, you hear about this concept made reality, then there's the reality of what do you have to face to make this happen? How is this going to be upheld? Are you going to have the security of the government that has, let this into being, and then also the experience of the people that use it. So it's encouraging to me to hear that it's not only you all kind of pushing this vision forward, that vision's being supported, which hopefully will lead to greater change as well. Yeah, so a question that I have for Maria is, I'm looking at all of these incredible projects that have gone into the aesthetics and kind of the storytelling, kind of this artistic narrative that runs through Mariposa. And I'm wondering, I think when we think about architecture, we think about a certain longevity and a lifespan of that building. And then it makes me wonder about the curation of that building. And because it's so integrated into the architecture, I'm just curious if, just thinking about as people interact with it over the years, how the aesthetics and the artists involved and the stories that are told there might change.
I think, I mean, it's kind of interesting even now looking back, because we completed this project maybe 8 years ago, I think, and that in the idea of longevity, and I think everything that we put into the project and the is still relevant now, and that I would hope that this place, like if we could see how I talked about 4 projects that are in the building that was part of what we started with, but that this place could be a platform for future installations and art pieces that other individuals could affect as a place. And that if that, so that it can kind of grow over time, like as you're saying.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting to think about, the way this team approaches, our architectural solutions, and I think we approach them, much like an artist does, and look for those opportunities to tell stories and create experiences that are about lessons and memories, and really sort of look for a higher plane that our architecture can communicate at. And of course, with the art and architecture program, that sort of design environment very much embraced, easily that world of incorporating artists, outside artists, and art into the project. And I think from a curation perspective, and Maria, you could talk to this probably really extensively, all of it has to be thought of as public art, something that has tremendous longevity and durability and meaning and significance.
It still all seems kind of private. As many people that pass through this port, there's still millions that never do. And I think for the people that experience Mariposa or San Luis for that matter, have a positive experience, and probably their perception has been definitely modified. But if you say live in Phoenix, and you turn on the 6 o'clock news, the southern border is still, dangerous, and crisis. You hear the border crisis every day. You hear about the border crisis, and nothing, is the positive nature of our work is never talked about, because it contradicts the narrative. And I hope, that over the decades, the contentiousness will recede, and the messaging will become more and more positive. The great thing about GSA owning the building is you don't mess with the art, that's for sure. There are consequences. And so that again works in everyone's favor.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive. The art and architecture program with GSA is very impressive, that it's part of the design excellence program, and the idea of bringing in the multiple viewpoints to a project that's already extremely complex is such a great challenge. And they, as an owner, they really live up to, selecting really contemporary artists and helping them develop their concepts and really making it a real piece at these public places. And as Brian mentioned, of then having to get, if they haven't done like public art before, then really helping them in terms of the having the piece kind of flesh out robust enough to last the 50 years or 100 that the buildings need to too. I think it's a great program.
So from there, I would love to, thinking about the human element of everyone who interacts with the artwork, who interacts with the architecture, who interacts with the garden. And this kind of leads me to a question for Chris about life, which sounds very big, but I'm thinking about the garden as a living thing, and Mariposa is a living thing. I think I like to think of architecture and art as living things as well, but I think in a different way than the garden. And so when you're thinking about keeping something alive and thriving and accomplishing, and also I'm just curious about what kind of trajectory the garden has taken, and where it will continue to go, and how it has coexisted with the people who also use the port of entry.
Yeah, that's a great question. We started by discussing the GSA's Design Excellence Program. I think that when most people hear the word design, they think of aesthetics and composition and form and color and the aspects related to art. I think an even more important part of the Design Excellence Program, and specifically some of the requirements through documents like the P100 document, is that there are systemic requirements. These are system-based projects. They're not, again, just buildings in the landscape. They're living systems, and we try to make them as regenerative and self-supportive as possible. And so, for instance, the government required that we keep all pollution on site, all of the water running off of the roads and the roofs filled with oil and debris and dirt. We were required to keep that on site, so we used a process called phytoremediation, which is using plants and soil to clean the water and the air. And we recirculated that water, and it did numerous things. It was part of a systemic approach. And so we are simultaneously cleaning the water and the air, but we're also supporting this landscape and these gardens. And so they, again, become part of the natural ecosystem around them. So we treated the landscape and the gardens as restorative and regenerative landscapes, not just, let's call it landscaping. And so by using seed mixes that were sourced in the area to preserve genetic biodiversity, by using materials and methods that already naturally occur around the site, this landscape will continue to thrive and grow primarily on rainwater, and the oasis areas will be supported by the harvested rainwater. And so, even in neglect, this landscape will look pretty good. It will look natural. It will look like it's in equilibrium with the surrounding environment. However, that said, GSA has embraced this landscape, and the maintenance people, the facilities people who take care of it are actually excited about it. And consequently, there was a white paper written about the site and the landscape there that demonstrates best practices for the development of ports of entry. And so it is a living thing. You see butterflies and bees. Pollinator habitat restoration is a requirement. The government requires us to provide habitat for pollinators to help reestablish that part of the ecosystem. So I think that it's really beautiful that we've moved beyond just treating the development of these buildings and these landscapes and providing art. They're not separate objects that are sort of a kit of parts. They're a systemic system. It's part of a whole. And so I think that's really the part of the landscape and the gardens that's really meaningful is that they're regenerative, restorative, and self-sustaining.
If I could, I wanted to push you a little bit, Chris, on, we've been talking I think, mostly about the poetics of the place, of the landscape, of the architecture, of the art. And every aspect of the design was also rigorously dealing with pragmatics. And just listening to Chris talk, and Chris, maybe you could expand on a little bit, but all of the landscaping had to deal with and respond to security requirements and line of sight requirements and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's true. There was a lot of concern expressed early on about the types of landscapes we were going to create. There was a concern over people hiding in the landscape, about creating dangerous conditions for officers. And so we worked very carefully and deliberately with them to develop an overhead canopy they could see underneath that still provided shade and native trees that helped, clean the water and the air, and a ground plane that did not grow up so high that it provided a security threat. So yeah, I mean, the approach again was entirely systemic, and we needed to interact with our clients. And I mean, we're talking about highly secure facilities with very serious mandates. And we took that seriously. We had the opportunity to tour the border and the facilities before we started, and we saw the dangerous conditions within which they worked. While we were on site, somebody, came running through trying to sneak past. And so we took that seriously. We weren't just out there starry-eyed designers. We took it seriously, and they took it seriously, and they took us seriously. And so there was a good dialogue, and we resolved all of these complex issues through a really deliberate, thoughtful process of back and forth. It was very iterative. I mean, we had dozens of site plans before we came upon one that stuck. We had dozens of iterations of each individual building, garden, and landscape. And by the time that it was done, we'd vetted those ideas, and they were defensible design solutions that also are beautiful.
It makes me think of, I'm going to be paraphrasing poorly Buckminster Fuller here, so I apologize to all of the architects and designers that I'm speaking with. But this relationship between good design and beautiful design, that you don't have to question whether something is beautiful if it is good. And I think that there comes in, also thinking about Buckminster Fuller, this idea of spaceship Earth, that we are all kind of beholden to one another to design a world that subsists us all. And I think looking at this project as, putting this kind of equilibrium and human experience and everything that you were so thoughtfully considering into the design led to its beauty in so many ways. And I think that's so refreshing to see when often you look at, at least I think of borders typically as being something that is so alienating, and being able to bring in beauty as a way of also making the lived experiences of those that utilize those borders a little bit better, I think is an incredible feat. So I think when we were developing this I'm a Citizen of the World exhibition, we have so many contemporary artists that are considering a world without borders, and what would the world be like if we understood our borders to be something that are a construct, or something that are malleable, that we can kind of remove from these kinds of contentious conversations. But the world that we live in has borders. And so I think what was so inspiring, and what we really wanted to bring y'all in to add to this conversation is, how can you look at the reality of borders and create something new and create something innovative and inspiring? So I just want to thank all of you for presenting this work, and for including your narrative and the work that you're doing, that you continue to do within the context of this exhibition, because I think it adds so much to this story about citizenship and what it means to live in a world with borders. So just want to thank you all for that.
Thank you, Kate.
Our pleasure to, and gratitude for being given this opportunity to work with you and the museum.
It's a real honor.
Yeah.
Feather in our cap.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.